Well, I guess I should probably describe some of the people a little better. I was listening to what I'd said yesterday, and my description was not very clear. It was pretty vague. I didn't really describe anybody. Um, I did describe my mother a little bit. Um, kind of give her a look. So she was, well, I think I said how tall she was, about 5'1", something around there. Um, uh, Skinny, fairly skinny. Not sticks and bones skinny, but pretty skinny. She always liked to wear them really cut off shorts that were too short. They were pretty inappropriate. Um, Tight pants type of person. I didn't think anything about it until I became an adult, and I started seeing pictures in my head. I was like, well, she was kind of inappropriate. Um, but she always expected us to have manners. She expected us to clean the house, to clean up after ourselves. I mean, we were staying by ourselves at the house. I don't remember a time in our life where we weren't allowed to be home alone. It's just always been a thing. I mean, we'd had babysitters every once in a while, and they were never the best of people. I mean, I described that one babysitter. It was a kid, a boy, when we watched Debbie Does Dallas. But I also remember another babysitter lived in a trailer house in Stigler. And I remember it was weird because she'd always sit, she'd have her hand behind hand back with her hand down her pants all the time. And I was only like 5 years old at the time, but I remember it was weird. Um, I might have been smaller than that, but I remember taking a nap, and she made me put my hand on her boob. I didn't think anything about it at the time. I mean, I knew we weren't supposed to, but right and wrong wasn't really in my vernacular at the time. I didn't know it was wrong. I just knew it was not right. If that makes sense. Anyway, so my stepfather, he was about 3 years older than my mother. He was a fairly skinny guy also. Um, he was fairly weird. I mean, now that I think about it, had this kind of military aspect about him. I thought so, at least. Like he was something was missing. I remember him getting on to me all the time. That's all I remember about him is always getting on to me. He didn't really get on to my sister that much. Uh, Definitely didn't get on to my baby brother. He was, I don't know, I couldn't tell you how tall he was or anything. It was so long ago. But, he was probably 5'10", if I had to guess. 165 pounds, 170. Um, but both of them smoked pot, smoked cigarettes, and drank a lot. I definitely remember that. Everybody smoked. Um, my mother was, or sorry, my granny. We called her Granny. I found out later that she didn't like being called Granny, but we called her Granny. Um, she was short, probably about 5 foot. A little overweight, but not like super fat or anything. But she had long hair, but that was before my time, and she got short hair. She cut it off really short, and that was the most that I remember about her. She was big into canning. She was a stay at home. My grandpa worked and she stayed home. Um, Probably because she was fighting cancer, but she never let us kids know. Uh, I believe she died of colon cancer. But she was, she always seemed to have this Mona Lisa smile going on all the time. I mean, she was always just, I don't know. My granny and grandpa were the only people I'd ever met that seemed to care about me. I thought. I wasn't sure. I knew my granny did. I wasn't sure about my grandpa. To be completely honest, I wasn't really sure about my granny either. But she was the closest, and my grandpa was the closest I'd ever felt that somebody actually cared. I went fishing with my grandpa all the time. Learned how to go noodling. Um, in fact, when my cousins would come down, we'd all go to the lake. That was our thing, that we always went to the lake. And while everybody's getting in these big, uh, flat bottom, deck boats and stuff and pontoons, I always wanted to ride with my grandpa and in a small little, sometimes I think it was a V bottom at one time. And, and then there was uh, I don't know if he ever owned a flatbed John boat, but I do remember the V bottom. I just preferred to be with Grandpa. Um, I felt comfortable. I always felt out of place when I was with anybody else. He called me Leroy. Uh, it was funny because my name is not Leroy at all. In fact, at that time, um, I went by JD for Joshua Daniel. Nobody called me Josh. Everybody just called me JD. Uh, but he was a very strong man. He was about 6'4", and I'm going off of memory. About 6'4", probably close to 300 pounds. Um, Tough as nails. Never complained about anything. Country, my granny was country. Uh, really dark skinned. Like I said, he drank a lot, but he was a functioning alcoholic. I never even noticed a difference back then. But to get a little personality of mine back then, I was, not to sound a little poetic, but let's say I was born with a broken heart. I was always sad. I was always scared I was going to lose somebody, that people were going to leave me. Oh, because it was true. I mean, the only consistency in my life at that time was my sister. And my sister didn't allow me to talk. I mean, I remember that very clearly. She did all the talking. Anytime somebody asked me a question, she'd answer. When people tried to bully me, if she was around, she would be the one that would fight them. I mean, you know, it didn't help. I mean, my Uncle Chris always called me Pansy. Um, was always acting like I was weak. And I was always trying to prove that I wasn't. I mean, I wasn't very strong. I was a sickly kid, but I didn't have any give. I remember, you know, falling and hitting my head on a rock and just busting my head open, and I didn't cry. I'd never cried over pain. It just been, it's just the way it was. When my stepdad shot me, I didn't cry. When my mom's boyfriend punched me, I didn't cry. I didn't see the point in it. It wasn't like I was trying to be tough. I just didn't see why a person would cry over pain. It doesn't make any sense. But I cried about everything else. I don't think there was a night that ever passed by that I didn't cry in the middle of the night. Nobody knew about it. I didn't talk to anybody about it. But I was always sad. I was always depressed. When my mother abandoned us, I didn't allow it to hit me at that time. I didn't allow myself to realize that she left. I didn't allow myself to realize that my dad showed up to court just to tell the judge that he didn't want us. I mean, I remember my aunt and uncle asking us, and I told them I don't know him. And I didn't really want to go, but it wouldn't matter anyways. He didn't want me. I mean, that was pretty obvious when he decided to try to kidnap my sister. Or before that, when he decided to leave as soon as I was born. But I don't try to get people to feel sorry for me. I don't feel sorry for me at all. I really don't. It was we'll call it a boot camp for life. I just had to be prepared for tougher things. Anyway, so when the I don't know exactly the point that I left off yesterday, but I'll just start here. When DHS come picked us up, and I ended up with my step grandma, and she sent us to my granny and grandpa, and we lived there for a couple of years, and then we got sent back to my mother's, and it only lasted like a day. I didn't exactly know what was going to happen to us, but we ended up going to my aunt and uncle's, and they were nice to me, but she made it a point to tell me that I was a guest in her house. And she brought that up a lot whenever we got in trouble, to remember that I'm just a guest in her house. But she was a very strict person. And I was flunking out of every class. I just didn't do schoolwork. I don't know why. And it's probably why people thought I was stupid. I mean, my uncle especially, would always act like I was an idiot, like I didn't understand things. Because it took me a lot longer to understand things. For what I'd seen, you'd think I would have had common sense or street smarts or something, but back then I didn't. I uh, I didn't do a lot of thinking about anything. But I remember when we moved in. Of course, I lived with my brother. Actually, came too. Also, not sure why, because he was living with my step grandmother, and I know she wanted him, but I thought, but we all ended up together, and my brother he had some issues. He would just lose his cool, ended up fighting me, and I ended up having to fight him back. But he was like my mom. He was a habitual liar, just constantly. He just could not tell the truth, even if it was getting me in trouble or my sister in trouble, because he wouldn't fess up to something. But I remember I was constantly trying to prove to my aunt and uncle that I wasn't lazy, that I was tough, I was strong, I was smart, but I just kept on proving differently. There's only two times I've ever seen them think that I was something. One time, I was playing catch with my uncle. I was 10 years old, and he threw a fastball right at my sternum, and I missed the ball because I just could not judge distance at that time. Let's just say I was not athletic at all, but I tried, and it hit me in the sternum, and it created this black spot on my chest. And I realized later in life, as an adult, that I'd actually broken my sternum, but I didn't cry. Well, let me say there's three times. And then another time I was picking up trash and there was glass in it, and it stabbed my leg about that much. I think that's about 4 inches deep. Well, wasn't that much. Sorry, my hand was smaller at the time, so it was probably about 2 inches deep. But it was pretty deep. You could see the bone, and I went to my aunt and told her that I'd cut myself, and she thought I just had a cut, and so she just poured alcohol on it. And when it went through, and she could see the bone, she started freaking out because she thought she didn't understand how come it was that deep and I wasn't crying, and seeing it that deep freaked her out. Um, but I got in a lot of trouble in that house. Uh, I'd always gotten in a lot of trouble from them, and I to this day I don't know why. The only thing I can remember is homework. I always got in trouble for not doing my homework. Um, I even got grounded to my room for a school year. The only time I was allowed to leave my room was to eat and to bathe and to go to school. And then I have to go back in my room. And so all I got to do was read. I didn't have video games or anything like that. And even if we did, they wouldn't allow us to have it in our rooms. Um, so that's when I started reading a lot. That's where a lot of my knowledge came. I read the whole Encyclopedia Britannica at that time, read a bunch of novels, like classics like Moby Dick, stuff like that. Um, and then the last nonfiction book I read in sixth grade was Dean Koontz' Lightning, or sorry, last fiction book. And then from that moment on, I just started reading nonfiction because I wanted to get smarter. Everybody thought I was dumb. In fact, so many people thought I was dumb that in school, uh, like I said, I was called JD. Well, everybody started calling me LD for learning disabled because I didn't know how to talk to people. I wasn't really socialized as a kid. I uh, I never stayed very long at a school, and so I got picked on a lot. And it was I know middle school is a very hard time for a lot of people, but it just seemed even harder for me. I mean, in my yearbook, people had signed it LD, you know, uh, so I had to live with that for my whole life, as long as I had that yearbook. Um, but I got into a lot of fights. That's how I knew how to respond to things, was fighting. But it got worse when that year, my sixth grade year, my granny died of colon cancer. I didn't know she was dying. Nobody told us. They had been to the hospital. They didn't tell us. So I never had the ability to say goodbye to her. I mean, she was literally the only one of two people that made me feel like that there was any peace in the world, that there was any love. I mean, I questioned it, but that was because I didn't know better. And I figured out later after I became older and was able to think back, I realized why I couldn't stay at my granny and grandpa's house anymore. It wasn't because they didn't want us. Because that's what my aunt said. She said they couldn't handle us. Um, well, it's because she was dying of cancer. She couldn't handle us because she was dying of cancer. And instead of letting me know that, I was told they just didn't want us. I don't think my aunt was abusive, but to some she would be. I mean, I didn't think at that time that she was really that bad, so I didn't know to complain about it or to say anything. But I mean, if I backtalk, I mean, or not backtalk. God, you didn't backtalk. Um, if I if I didn't do what I was supposed to do, it was nothing for her to just karate chop you right in the face, which is weird. But instead of slapping, she just went like that and hit you right in the face. And I'd get my ass busted all the time. One time she picked up my Bible right next to my bed, and this was later in life. I'll go ahead and tell that story later. But I still was always trying to impress them. It's never successful. I could never get anything they tried teaching me, which was very rarely they tried teaching me anything. The only thing I can remember was trying to teach me how to drive a standard. I knew how to drive a car because I'd been driving since I was 8. My grandpa taught me how to drive, but I didn't know anything but a standard, and I couldn't understand what my uncle was telling me, and it frustrated them. They get mad at me. I feel like I'm complaining about everything. Um, Anyways, that year in sixth grade, I tried baseball for the first time. Tried to be in a sport, and the only thing I was good at was getting hit by the ball. I wasn't scared to get hit, so I could get on base really easy. Because in sixth grade, nobody can throw very well, but I could never swing the bat. It just never happened. I never swung until my very last at bat. It was the last time, or the first time I ever swung the bat the whole season. And I hit the ball, and it hit the fence. I mean, I was hoping that my uncle would say proud of me or something, but he still didn't say he's proud of me. Said good job though. That felt good. But I didn't play baseball anymore though. Not during junior high. But I got into a lot of fights that year. Actually, for the next 3 years, I got into a lot of fights at school. My aunt and uncle never knew about it. We lived about 5 miles away from the school, and we rode the school bus. But I'd get into a fight after school and was able to catch the bus. I remember one time well, the first time I scheduled a fight, uh, which I thought was dumb. I even said it then. I was like, I don't like scheduling a fight. If we're going to fight, let's do it now. Well, they were afraid to get in trouble. Um, and so we scheduled a fight at the park that's right by the school. And we go there and he wouldn't start fighting. And I was scared to fight. I was never scared to get hit. I was scared of people watching me. It was that feeling. I could just feel everybody watching me, and I was on the spot, and I felt so out of place and defeated already. And the only reason the kid wanted to fight me was because he quit. He was my sister's boyfriend, and they quit being boyfriend girlfriend because at that age you're not really dating. But it was just he then started talking trash about me and stuff, and then decided he wanted to confront me and fight me because I was an easy target, and he thought, well, I can whoop him. And then I um, I remember this basketball player. I mean, he was about 6 foot tall, and at that time, I was close to 5 foot, something like that. I was really small, uh, and he decided to fight me and meet me. He wanted to meet me after school, uh, and right outside the basketball gym. So he met me, and he came up to me, and I froze. Um, I didn't know what to do, and then he punched me in the face, and it got my attention. So did a I did a flying jump kick, completely missed him because anybody that's been in a fight or has been in enough fights knows that kicking really is kind of jump kicks and swinging back kicks and stuff looks good in the movies, but in reality they suck. But for some reason I knew how to fight instinctively, but I didn't know how to win a fight at that time. I just knew how to get my ass kicked, and I was good at that because I wouldn't give up. In fact, he was dragging me around, you know, kicking me, punching me, and I just kept going. I just didn't. I had no give up. Finally, he gave up because he said, "I got to get back into playing, practice. Otherwise, his coach was going to get him." By that time, I missed the bus, so I actually had to take off running. I ran 5 miles to my house, um, and actually beat the bus, which was nice. Um, I then asked my aunt and uncle if I could join martial arts, and they said no because I'd be fighting all the time if I was in martial arts, which is kind of ironic. Well, like I said, I got into a lot of fights. I even tried to, I was on the school bus once, and a wrestler, there was a bunch of wrestlers on the bus that day, and a wrestler decided to start picking on me. And then they all chimed in and picked on me. So I just jumped and I just punched him. And then I just started jumping all of them, and they started whooping my ass, got me to the ground, and just started kicking me. But I fought. I wasn't afraid to fight them all. Uh, the next day, one of them, his name was Josh something. Anyway, he came up to me, and he asked me if I'd join the wrestling team. And of course, I said no. I don't want to be wrestling with a bunch of guys. I don't want to be rolling around the mat, rolling on the ground with a bunch of guys. Just seemed really gay to me. That was my answer. Of course, I was a kid. I kind of wish I would have gotten into wrestling, but that year I'd only gotten into one more fight, um, and well, I've been into several before that, but nothing too big. I mean, I'd have people confront me and then give up before, because they realize I'm not going to give up. So I can't really say there was a lot of physicalness, just people trying to fight me. And then when I wouldn't back down, they'd give up. They'd walk away. They'd just talk trash. I had one friend in high school or in junior high. His name was Curtis Summers. He's a big guy, not like fat, but he was tall. And I mean, he was filled in. He was thick. He was somebody you didn't mess around with. And and me and him were the only people that wore cowboy boots. Uh, and that's probably one of the reasons why I got picked on, because I wore cowboy boots all the time. Um, I mean, that's just what I was comfortable in, and I wasn't the type to try to fit in. Well, I thought I wasn't, but it was the only time in my life I did try to fit in a little bit. I There's this one guy the real big guy. I mean, I'm talking, he was as wide as he was tall, and he was pretty tall. Um, his name was Chris, and Chris was he was gothic, without the makeup, but he had this Raiders jacket that was really popular back in the 90s, early 90s, late 80s, early 90s. Um, and he let me wear it, and I was this really tiny guy, but it was popular wearing jackets that were too big. So I probably looked really stupid, but I didn't think I did. But I didn't really have a lot of friends. He was kind of a friend, but we didn't hang out. We didn't really talk a lot. We just saw each other at lunch. That's about it. I don't even think we ever had a class together. Again, I was failing all my classes, so I really suck at telling these stories. I really apologize. Anyway, so I'm sitting there getting fights at school. You know, my last fight being with this one guy. He was a friend of mine, so I don't know why we were fighting. It might have been, I mean, I know he was a martial artist. He probably talked bigger than he really was, but I didn't know at the time. But I remember we got into a fight, um, and I grabbed him from behind, and he hit my head up against the wall. Um, and then the bell rang for the buses, so I had to run to get on the bus. And I don't remember the trip, but I remember when I got home, I fell on the table and I was lost. I didn't know where I was. Apparently, I had a concussion, but nobody ever knew I got into a fight. So, and I didn't tell anybody. But my aunt and uncle still was, they didn't seem to care about that kind of stuff. I mean, they would have cared if they would have known. They just didn't care enough to ask to find out what's going on, to get me counseling. I remember my aunt talking about we probably should have had counseling because of the way we grew up, but she doesn't know the way we grew up. I mean, nobody asked. Not one person ever asked me about what had happened. Now they'd talked to my sister about it. I mean, she was very open about what everything happened, and it bothered me. She was very, later I found out the word is self-confessor. She'd meet up with somebody brand new, and within 5 minutes she'd tell them about the time she got raped, which is sad, but it made me mad. Because at the time, it was an innocent child, probably, maybe. But my sister's personality, she's just always wanting attention. She always wanted attention, and she got it. I remember I'd always been in choir, ever since, well, I say always, since sixth grade, I joined choir. And I'd stayed in that school for the longer than I'd ever been anywhere. I was there for 3 years because it was a 3-year middle school. and planned on going to the next, to ninth grade at the intermediate high school. Now it's not called intermediate high school, I don't think, but it was back then. But they seemed to only talk about my sister's singing. They never talked about mine. In fact, they made a music video with my sister. One of them old school cameras that are on your shoulder and stuff. But they really never took much interest in anything I did. I but after my granny died, well, I should say before my granny died, we always went down there to the farm and we'd go to the lake. We always had big family get-togethers around Christmas and Thanksgiving, um, with my uncle Leonard, my uncle Chris, my uncle Leonard's wife Debbie, and our two boys. Then my uncle Chris, and he had a son, Dustin. And it was a huge thing, And I remember a lot of times we have it at Leonard's house because he had a bigger house. Uh, and it was just awe inspiring. I mean, it was just crazy. But again, my mother would write letters saying that she was she's sending us something in the mail. She never did, and then the letters ended up stopping. But we ended up leaving Checotah. Uh, they told me years later that it was because they wanted a better school system for us. I don't know. But we ended up moving onto the lake and right outside of Checotah, and we went to Checotah High School. And I instantly started making friends there. It was easier. It was a small town. I mean, 3,500 people in the whole town, as opposed to Broken Arrow, that's, I don't know, 20, 30,000. Um, they only have one of each, one school. They have the elementary, uh, intermediate, junior high, and then high school. And then they had alternative school, of course. That's if you get in trouble. But I was excited to move because I was looking for change. I was thinking every time I moved, I thought the same thing. I was like, I can reinvent myself. I can become somebody different. Every time we moved, I was thinking we could become somebody, or I could become somebody different. I had very low self esteem. I was, like I said before, I was very sad, very sickly. I didn't talk a lot at all. I was intelligent, but my aunt and uncle would downplay everything I said. They'd pick on me because I said the word actually a lot. I mean, I was a kid. You get stuck on a word. Heck, I know adults that do that. But living with my brother and sister, my brother was still always getting in trouble, always getting me in trouble because he wouldn't fess up to something that he did. And I just wasn't the type to say, well, he did it or she did it, you know. Actually, let me back up one time. My brother and my sister both, when I was in the eighth grade, both tried running away. They actually left the house at different times and had, again, tried to run away. Um, my brother was like in fourth grade, fourth grade, and my sister was in ninth grade. And they'd talk to them. And I remember it was more of a comforting. It's like, listen, things aren't that bad, blah, blah, blah. You just got to, talk to somebody. Well, one day I actually was going to run away. I was just fed up with it because my aunt acted like I was a liar all the time. And I never lied. I didn't. You know, Let me back up. Sorry. I did lie about doing my homework because I found that was the only way I could do it because I couldn't get myself to do my homework. Um, but other than that, everything was a lie to them. and I was always in trouble, always grounded. Um, but I remember I started working out when I was in sixth grade. I wanted to be strong. I wanted to be tough. Um, but I was still so skinny. You couldn't tell I was strong because I was so skinny. Um, but when I tried to run away, my I didn't. I left, and then I walked down the block, and I just sat there for a while. Then I turned around, came back, and they asked me where I'd been and stuff. And I said, "Well, honestly, I was thinking about running away." And I got my ass busted. I mean, they whooped my ass for that. It's like they didn't care about how hurt I was. They only cared that I shouldn't have tried to run away, and they were going to beat my ass to teach me a lesson. And at that point in my life, I mean, I honestly thought that was the only way anybody got taught anything. They got a beating. I remember they had to actually quit because it got to the point. I made some goofy sound. My aunt hated it, so she started busting my ass, and it wasn't doing anything. I wasn't crying because I would cry, but I would cry before I got my ass busted. Again, I was emotionally sensitive. I cried anytime I thought somebody was upset at me. It was just the way I reacted to things. But the pain, it didn't bother me. I'd have whelps on my ass, and I've had it worse. They couldn't do anything to me that hadn't been done before. But one time she, was getting on to me for making some in the '90s. Is that where people went do 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 like that? It was totally not politically correct at all. But it was, back then in the late '80s, '90s. I can't remember exact year, but uh, she ended up trying to bust my ass. She upgraded to a belt that didn't work. Um, then she grabbed a 2x4 because we didn't have a paddle, and she ended up breaking the board on my ass. And I just still laughed at her. I just kept laughing. I don't know why. At that moment, I just, you know, she, nothing worked. So that was the last time that I ever got an ass busted. From then on, it was, hit me with something or hitting my, slapping me in the face. So, that was junior high, and I forgot to mention that, so I apologize. Um, but I did have a couple of girlfriends, though, in junior high, um, which is strange because I didn't have a lot of friends at all. But yeah, I found it easier talking to girls. Um, but I remember the first couple of them were not attractive. It was just the fact that they would say yes, and it made me feel special. There was nothing positive, nothing I was attracted to about them, not just looks, personality, everything. But there was this one girl, my last girlfriend in eighth grade. Her name was Emily Jackson. Uh, she introduced me to the Counting Crows. I'd never kissed a girl at that time. And I remember one night or one day, she was waiting, and I was supposed to kiss her for the first time. Um, and waiting on right at the entrance of the school, on the side entrance, to go to the buses. And I meet her, but I chickened out and I left. But I hate the fact that I keep on backtracking. But there is an important story that haunts me to this day. It may not seem big to anybody else, but I always made a point not to hurt anybody. I didn't like to hurt people's feelings. I didn't like to, make fun of people. Um, which is kind of ironic. I make fun of people all the time now, but it's in jest. If I think it really bothers them, I won't do it. But I remember getting on the bus, and I this girl named Sarah Snyder gets on the bus, And she wasn't even that big. She really wasn't. She was a little overweight, but not huge. And I remember yelling out, "Oh God, the bust is tilting." And everybody started busting up laughing. And it's haunted me ever since then. I mean, that was 32 years ago, and it still bothers me. I mean, I could feel what it did to her. And that's the thing is I could always feel people's energy when they were upset. And I just knew I crushed her. And I didn't feel good about that at all. I thought about looking for her. I tried, but I mean, hell, I don't know what her name is now or anything. And, you know, I wouldn't know how to get a hold of her. I don't talk to anybody from that time period of my life. Even though I moved back to Broken Arrow and Tulsa area um, years and years later. Uh, and I do have to. I was very active in the choir, and I remember the first time. See, I sung in there, and they knew I could sing, but I would never did any kind of solos or anything. But we had a choir concert that was more about like a rock and country kind of thing, and it was for the school. It was an assembly thing, and I actually sang some Elvis songs, which it was like right at the end of the year. Um, if I would have sang that at the beginning of my junior high or something, my school years probably would have ended up different because nobody knew I could do anything. And I remember singing it, and people came up to me that bullied me, talking about how impressed they were, and how they didn't know I could sing because I was sang, a solo in front of thousands of kids, and I don't know how I did it back then because I was so nervous. I was scared to be in front of people, scared to be seen, but I wanted to. I wanted to be in front of people. I wanted to be seen. I was just scared. I didn't know how to do it. Um, anyway, so fast forward, we moved to Checotah, where I was actually lived when I was living with my mom and stepdad, and I didn't know that. In fact, at that time in my life, I'd never been to Muskogee, where I was born, and we were only 20 miles from Muskogee. In fact, it was the biggest city close to us, which still only had like 20,000 people in it. But at that time in my life, I'd never been to Muskogee, or at least I never remembered being to Muskogee. I'd obviously been, like when I was in the hospital for 2 weeks, it was Muskogee Hospital. But I we moved to Checotah on the Lake Eufaula, but it was in Checotah off a lot of water road out in the, you could say country. Up here they'd call it the country. I don't, just because I'm so used to being way out in the country, but no paved roads are close by or stoplights or stop signs. In fact, I didn't know names of roads had names at the country that I grew up in. But I think that's a pretty good place to stop. But again, I apologize for jumping around all over the place. Trying to remember this stuff is not easy. I mean, I've never spoke about this to anybody. I've never had these conversations with anybody. Never tried to remember this stuff at all. But I appreciate you listening to me and trying to figure this out. Hopefully, it's enough information for you. Anyway, thank you.